Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have returning guest Damian Mason. How are you?
Very well. Thanks for having me on.
Good. I'm excited for this conversation. You guys are going to be as well. Damian has been on the show once already. He is very popular online, and I'll get into his bio. Businessman, speaker, author, podcaster, host of Extreme Egg Farms, Cutting the Curve. So, Damian, you are a very busy man. Thanks for taking the time. Welcome to the show. Are you ready?
Tracy, I'm ready, man. I'm ready. I'm glad to be a recurring, and I mean, I was good enough before you brought me back a second time, so that's good. And we talked before you hit the record button about your followers. I love Canada. I work up there. I am an American. I am sitting here in my 1800s era farmhouse that my wife and I refurbished and are going to be refurbishing again here in northeastern Indiana. I live part-time in Arizona with the rest of the Western Canadians. I live part-time in Arizona. I got back last week to the farm, and it's a lovely spring day while we're recording here. So this is cool. I'm glad to be here on the Impact Farming Show.
Nice. I'm sure you're going to be catching a few snowbirds headed home here too.
That happens.
Okay, where I want to go right away. I seen you share a clip and you said, history repeats itself. You were at an event, you were speaking to a crowd, you looked out, you've seen a bunch of 40-year-olds, and you're like, is any of this resonating? And then you realize, because of the age, we didn't know about this. And when you started listing the similarities, even though I'm Canadian and it was very much American agriculture, I'm like, hello, Damian.
Right.
I am not ashamed to admit that I'm in that age bracket where I'm sitting here going, what? It's been good. What's going on? So do you want to just take it from there and go, history repeats itself, similarities from that time to now?
Yeah. And by the way, so remember, I speak to groups in Canada. I was just actually at Egg Farmers of Ontario last month, and let's face it, many aspects of Canadian and United States agriculture walk down the same aisle together. Maybe we don't always hold hands, and there's a few stops along the way that Canada agriculture takes and the United States doesn't. Obviously, policies are a little different, but there's a lot of similarities. So to kind of cut to that, the point that I was making in that video was, I was in front of an audience, and I do a lot of sort of it's almost like a historical education. And it's not like, oh, let's talk about an old barn. I'm talking about the real things that impact the marketplace. So my degree is in agricultural economics. I'm a farm owner. I've been around this since I was a little kid. My first job was bottle feeding the calves on the dairy farm where I was raised a couple miles from where I'm sitting right now. So I've been around this game for a while. I was born in 1969. I'm going to be 56 years old here this summer. And so I was out there working on the farm when I was 8. And I was 11 years old in 1980. So one of the similarities that I was making, Tracy, when comparative today to then, because I'm in front of that audience, and it dawns on me when I'm going through some of these historical perspectives about the economic picture, the political picture, the trade, the quantity, the productive aspect of agriculture, et cetera. And it dawns on me, holy crap, there's a bunch of people out here that are 36 years old, and all they've really ever known is ag good. And I'm not in any way being judgmental. Oh, I walked uphill to school both ways in a blizzard, because I know that the Canadians say that same shit just like American old people do. No, I'm not doing that at all. What I'm really saying is, good for you. If you're 36 years old and you're in this industry, you've essentially seen a golden age of North American agriculture. Let's just go ahead and kind of put it in perspective. The 80s were terrible. Everybody, whether you're Canadian or American, knows that the 80s were a washout. The 80s were terrible. Here in the United States, we had bankruptcies. The picture that I paint is, none of this uphill school in a blizzard, but I know here in Indiana of farming assets that were so deep underwater, the bank didn't even repossess them. And I have younger people say, what the hell are you talking about? I said, okay, let's just kind of give you a picture. By 1981, the bottom's falling out of agriculture in 1981. By 1982 and 3, we are so glutted. And we've got this absolute, farmers are, all that farm aid and all that, Rain on the Scarecrow, John Mellencamp, who's an Indiana guy like me, wrote that song in 84 or 85, I think it came out. So you're talking about this thing, there were 80% loan to value farms loans that banks had made. So if the land goes down by 50%, which it did, that means that bank is now underwater. They had 80% of loan to value. So, and here it was worth 50%. That means they're upside down 30%. The bank's saying, why would we want to take that back? We would lose 30%. Now throw a couple of hog barns on that farm loan. And in the first 2 years, they go through rapid depreciation and they're starting to be a little bit, worn down. Now you've got improvements, dairy facility, hog barns on this land where there's 80% loan to value rates, and now 80% loan to value on those hog barns or those dairy setups. They were also worth about 50%. So the bank's saying, we can't take this farm and this hog setup and this dairy setup back from this farmer. We'll be losing. Let them stay and operate if they can, and at least make some payment. That's how bad things were. Assets were so underwater, the bank wouldn't even take them back. That's a true story. You can look it up. So why do I make this comparison, Tracy, between now and then? Are things as bad now? No. Are we over leveraged? Not nearly to what we were back then. Do I anticipate farm ground dropping by 50%? No. But let me give you some comparisons that do line up. What got us into the 1980s crisis was inflation. We have been inflationary now for 5 years, not to the tune that we were back in the late 70s, early 80s. We have inflation problems, but not like we did then. Are we as overlevered? No. But here's a couple things that we do have that are very much the same picture. We have trade fights. In 1980, U.S. President Jimmy Carter did the grain embargo against the Soviet Union, which is now Russia, but back then it was much larger and it contained all those other provinces like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, etc. And our idea here in the United States was we thought we were so damn powerful that we're going to starve the Soviets into submission to agree with what we wanted them to do. What really happened by us embargoing, meaning we said, we're not going to sell you our grain, we're going to starve you into submission. What they really did was, for once, the commies got good at grain production. They just ramped up and put more acres into production, and they started buying grain from other countries that could supply them. Almost, you could say, the Brazil agricultural miracle got a huge shot in the arm because of these types of things. When the global marketplace demands something, we have proven in the last 45 years that we can supply it somewhere, whether it's South America, Canada, Uzbekistan. So we ramped up supply because these countries under the Soviet control said, we can't count on the U.S. We're going to have to count on ourselves or open up other markets, Australia, whatever. So it ended up being a huge influx of new supply. Where are we right now in global stocks? We're trying to pretend that soybeans are cheap because China and the United States are fighting. That's BS. Why they're cheap is because there's too many soybeans on the global supply. So what similarities do we have between now and the 80s? We've got inflation. We've got global strife. We've got trade fights and trade spats going on. We've got oversupply going on. And we have uncertainty. Uncertainty usually then creates poor decision making. We might be seeing that in agriculture. We've got a few other similarities that I see. And I don't think this trade thing is going to be good for us. I don't think there's a lot of things that are happening right now that could end up turning just like the 80s. But the oversupply is one of the biggest issues that we have globally. The only couple things that aren't an oversupply right now are beef, which is why the beef prices are very good for you people out in the western provinces, and eggs here in the United States, because we've had this avian influenza problem for several years. Everything else is oversupplied. Cotton is at 69 cents a pound right now. Obviously, we don't grow cotton in Manitoba, nor do we in Indiana. But 69-cent cotton is about 25 cents cheaper than it costs to make the stuff. You can go through line item by line item and look at every commodity and say we're pretty well oversupplied. That's going to be the biggest indicator that takes us right back to the 80s. There's another aspect. Our assets have run up. If I wanted to buy land in Manitoba, if I wanted to buy land in Saskatchewan, like my Canadian friend that I had on my Business of Agriculture show a month or so ago, Robert, who's got 250,000 acres in Saskatchewan, if I wanted to go and buy that, would we pretty clearly across the board say that land values in the U.S. and Canada are at near record highs? They were in 1980 as well. So we've got some similarities, to say the least.
Wow. I love that breakdown. And when you said about the younger people, there is a whole lot of us, Damian, in this industry that don't have a hot clue. And I am not afraid to admit it. So I appreciate you going through that walkthrough. The next thing I actually wanted to talk to you about is the oversupply, because the narrative, I always get a little bit frustrated that there's always a going narrative for every industry. It's like feeding the growing world. I know you love that one, Damian.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
are
So
not feeding a growing world anymore,
we
right?
will, we are for the time being. It's going to change quickly. So
Okay.
to that end, let's just use corn. I'm from a corn producing area, but also so are you. I mean, we didn't grow corn in Manitoba 40 years ago. Obviously, the varieties have changed. You got a little bit warmer. You've gotten better technology, et cetera. So on a corn standpoint, we raised our yield by about 5% in 24 over what it had been in 2023 per acres. I'm talking about. We're making about 7 times more bushels per acre on average than we did in just 90 years ago when hybridization in the 1930s took hold. The Dust Bowl, tough growing conditions, advancements in science made us take corn to the next level, literally. So what else has 7 times its productive capacity in, say, the last 90 years? In other words, are we 7 times more? Probably a lot of things, right? Okay, maybe cars are they 7 times better than 90 years ago? You could argue maybe, maybe not. Computers, they didn't even have them 90 years ago, right? So really, agriculture has just sort of done the same thing as most things, where innovation came in the last, really since the Industrial Revolution. Places like Canada, United States, wealthy countries, good educational systems, man, we're good at it. So here's the thing. We've kept up. In fact, we've outpaced population growth. 100 years ago, there was a concern, oh my God, how are we going to feed these people? We've gone from about 1.5 billion or something at the turn of the century, 1900, to today, 2025, we're at 8 billion people on the planet. The thing is, we're not going to 7 or 8 times our population again like we have in the last century. And even if we did, clearly we've proven our productive capacity has outstripped our demand for really, again, going back to the 80s. One thing that made us better in the last 25 years, to that point, Tracy, about younger folks saying, I've only known ag being good. We've been in the 20 to 25 year up cycle in agriculture, and it's largely due to advancing global economics, which means humans could not only buy food, they could buy better food and more of it. And then China. You take 1.3 billion people whose caloric consumption roughly has doubled in the last 25 years. 1.5 billion people eating twice as many calories, also eating more protein, which requires more grains and more of it. That's the reason we've been so good in ag for the last 25 years. Here in the United States, we're making about 50% more corn, 50% more soy, and 50% more pork than we did just 20 years ago. We can't keep this up because we're going to have nowhere to go with it. You're going to have the same problem in Canada. You're going to have the same problem everywhere because of our productive capacity. And then the argument, Tracy, has always been, yeah, but we have lots of population. Population growth is going to continue for the next decade or two, and then it's going to start to decline. I started looking at the numbers 12 years ago, started telling my ag crowds, this whole feed the world thing, it's a cute thing. We grew up hearing it. We all like to say it at our meetings. It ain't going to be a problem because productive capacity. If we're so damn hungry, why are we taking 40% of U.S. corn and turning it into ethanol to burn in our gas tanks? If we needed gas, we'll just buy more oil from Alberta. So that's the point. I started making that point, and people said I was crazy. I started laying out the numbers. Fertility rates of 1.3 in Western Europe. Fertility rates meaning number of children per woman, 1.6 in the United States. I started saying it for 3 years. And then I ran across this book right here called Empty Planet, written by fellow Canadian Daryl Bricker, who's been on my show, The Business of Agriculture. And he wrote the book all about the shock of global population decline. The more educated a woman gets, the more economic opportunity a woman has, the longer she waits to have babies, and the fewer babies she has. Yay, girls. This is happening in just about everywhere except for fundamentally Islamic countries, which aren't that populous. Even in China, 1.2 babies per female. They changed their whole one-child policy in 2016. In 2023, they did it again and said, you know what, have 3 kids. Now they're actually encouraging, which I have a feeling means probably forcing peasant women to breed because this is a real issue. So we're not going to have a problem with feeding the world, and it's almost still shocking because to us in ag, Tracy, every meeting we have gone to for our lives, we've gotten told, feed the world by 2050. And this whole bunk that started about 15 years ago, between now and the year 2050, Agriculture is going to have to produce more food between now and the year 2050. Somehow just magically pick that number out of the sky. More food between now and 2050 is going to be produced than has been produced in the history of human civilization. It's bullshit. It's not accurate. It's just not true because population is stagnating in the next 10 years and then it's going to start to decline. It won't even take till 2050. Best part is we do have if we can keep the global economy escalating, the best part is humans might be eating better, which is good for agriculture. Eating a little bit, maybe not more, because God knows we don't need any more caloric consumption in places like the United States where we're 40% obese, but eating better could bode well for agriculture.
I love it. And you know why I love your take and your research and your factual sharing of knowledge is what I don't like is when they're using those slogans and saying that it is misleading. And we look at farmers in the US, in Canada, if we're always being told, feeding a growing population. Yeah. What are you doing as a farmer? You're like, yay, scale up, scale up. But here's the thing, Damian, if you're a farmer or a business person in an industry, we're not going to be well liked for this conversation, but I don't care if it helps somebody. If you're a farmer and you're scaling up in a climate that is not going to support it, that just leads to bankruptcy. So I don't like when people are using those slogans and it's false advertising and dangerous.
Tracy, our Secretary of Agriculture, a Purdue grad like me, Purdue guy like me, his name was Earl Butz in the 70s. And there was an absolute boom in the 70s. So this, again, you want me to do the comparative between the 80s to today. And I'm not wishing this on to us. And I don't think it's going to be the depths of hell like the 80s were. But I see similarities. And what do we know? History may not exactly repeat itself verbatim, but history sings a real similar tune. It may not be verbatim, but it's a real similar tune. So think about it this way. Our Secretary of Agriculture in the 70s was basically a cheerleader for American agriculture. And he went to every farm meeting and got on every bit of media and he said, growing world, feed the world, more population, plant from fence row to fence row. And here in the United States, we didn't just plant from fence row to fence row, we bulldozed out the fence rows and we planted through those also. So the 70s was a golden era. Where else has there been a golden era of agriculture? You could argue from 2005 till 2020 through 2023, with the exception of a few years, 2014, 15, where things turned down. Not even bad, just got a little bit of a downturn. And then particularly in here in the United States, 21, 2022, and 2023, 3 record farm income years in the history of American agriculture going back to when the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock. We're following that just like the 80s followed the very good 70s. We used to joke about corn, beans, and Florida farmers. Places like here in the Midwest, you grew your corn and your soybeans, and by God, you hopped in your Cadillac and drove to Florida. It was a great time. And then the 80s came. There's that similarity again. Again, what bailed us out was the economic advancement of the world and the population growth between the 80s and today, particularly places like China, that changed the global economic picture. Otherwise, if it had not been for that, we're in the 80s, very similar to where we are now, Tracy. We had too much corn. We had too much milk. I'm talking the United States here. In fact, in 1983, we invented the PIC program. I explained this to my ag audiences, and my ag audiences, these younger people are like, what the hell is he talking about? I said, well, I was 14, and I was living through the depths of hell of the 80s farm crisis, and they invented a thing called the PIC program, payment in kind. The government paid farmers with corn in agreement to not plant corn. So the idea was to create a double drawdown on the supply. Payment in kind lasted 2 years because there was so much corn on the market. They essentially gave you corn if you removed acres. So land sat idle, and that's PIC program acres. So it's the lowest number of acres of corn planted like in the last 40 years. And in the milk thing, the government paid dairy farmers to sell their cows and sign a contract and said, we will not re-enter the dairy business. The beef people weren't particularly happy because you take 1 million or 2 million Holsteins and throw them into the beef market in about a year's time. Burger prices got to where it's almost free. So in other words, we've seen this movie before if we're my age and have an eye for history and love to keep up. And like you said, do the research and keep up with things. And so you could argue we've got so much of stuff now and we don't have blood in the water yet, but when I'm hearing about large tracts of land now that are getting transferring cash renters because the existing operator couldn't get funded. This starts to have some similar tune to what we saw 45 years ago, 44 years ago.
Well, and I think this is important again, and I'm speaking to the people my age here, Damian, and I'm sure you've had these learning periods as a business person. You know, when you're young and eager and you don't know a lot and you're just expanding, like you're smart, but you don't really know until you know.
Yeah.
So here we are, 40-year-old farmers, 50-year-old farmers hitting our prime
Mhm.
after getting into farming, probably scaling up. We're sitting at a nice place. And if we look to the last 20, 25 years, like you said, hoping that that's what the future is going to look like, I'm sure we're wisening up a little bit here. That's dangerous
Mhm.
because all we've ever known is good, Damian. And if we're in a changing time in
Mhm.
history, these conversations need to be had, right?
Well, let's go ahead and do that comparative again.
Yeah.
Some would tell you, and I don't disagree, there was amount of over leverage going in the 80s. There were more farmers going into 1980 than there are today, right? There's consolidation. That's across both borders, right? Consolidation, get bigger. You're in a commodity business. There's low margins, more acres, acres can be farmed with less people because of the machinery and the technology, all those things. Remember, if you're a baby boomer, you were born between 1945 and 1964. So let's say the heart of that, the biggest birth year, at least in the United States, was 1957. That's when we had the most babies like ever until, I don't know, 20 years ago or something. We hit that number again, but we did it with a much bigger population. So 1957. How old are you in 1980 if you were born in 1957? 23. When would you be getting into farming? Maybe half of them went to college, maybe half of them did not. So you're about 3 years into your farming in 1981. When are you most over leveraged? Are you over leveraged when you're 60, when you've been socking money away and paying off land payments? Of course not. You're most levered when you are 20 to 30 years old. When did all the baby boomers enter the agriculture? About that time. So now that's why you've got this extended amount of over leverage, over loaned, overextended on their money. To your point, I hope to God this does not happen because the folks that are your age have, if they're over leveraged because they assume things will always be this good. Land only ever goes up. And we've heard that. I've heard younger people say, if you got bankers, I've heard young bankers, if you got the dirt, you can't get hurt. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, yeah, I've got a big loan over there against that property, but I've got the farm ground against the loan. And I said, well, do you think the farm ground can't go down? Oh yeah, well, I remember it went down in 2014. We had a 5% correction. I said, well, what if there's a 50% correction? No, farm ground's never gone down by 50%. I said, hold my beer. Because my parents bought a chunk of ground and we were not well off. They bought 50 acres of below average ground in 1981, literally 6 months before the bottom fell out. Within a year of my parents buying this ground that was an ill-advised purchase to begin with, but I was, 12. Nobody listened to me back then. Go feed the calves, Damian. Within a year of acquisition, it was worth 50% of what they had paid for it. And we were obligating an 18% loan. So I am in no way saying that we're going to have that again. Farm programs are a reason we won't have that again. After the bad 80s and farmers shooting bankers and things like this, I think the government said we better just throw money at these farmers. But a 10%, 20% downturn against all assets, a 40% downturn in incomes is not, hell, it's already happening. And so I would worry, but I would say that the folks that are 40 should be in a pretty good position compared to those that were like 25, because if you've done things right, you've got some hay in the barn, right?
Or have we been having some really good times, credit available, things have been good, and we've really been expanding and we're quite leveraged. I mean, we like to work with our numbers and make sure we're good, but we also know other farmers that think the current beef prices are here forever. We're
Right.
like, wait a minute, let's budget over here and let's make sure we're good, right? And I'm not saying, I mean, well, as all business people are, they'll be on every end of that spectrum, but I don't think people realize, and I've heard other people talking about that. We're in, what did they call it? The fourth turning. We're in a huge change in the world. And I think I'm not going to go too far into that, but like the world powers and I just don't think we've seen this before. So that's why I want to have maybe this very unpopular conversation, right? So
Yeah,
it,
and I feel like I get up and speak at ag functions all the time. That's
yeah,
one of my things I do. I get paid to
yeah,
speak at agricultural, and I'm funny because I've got a comedy background, and I can make jokes, but then I also put up some pretty heavy stuff, and it's a good thing that I insert some humor in there because I feel like sometimes I said, "Man, that was kind of dour," but I also owe it to my audience to be sincere and say, "Listen." And again, there's nothing more condescending than telling someone that's 36, well, you just don't know. That's a very condescending, arrogant way to do. I'm not in any way doing that. More so, what I'm saying is take this the right way. But you started your career, let's say, in the year 2004, and it was off to the races largely for the last 2 decades. And you've never really seen huge washouts. And so that's where I think that it's imperative, maybe, that the folks that are in this industry have some historical context. And I've already had the people say, well, it's not going to be like that because of these reasons. Agree. Largely, is it going to be government intervention? Here's the thing a bunch of, and I know this is where you want to go probably anyway, Tracy, it was globalization and trade and a growing global economy that made much of this possible. You've got 41 million people up in Canada. You produce enough food for 3 times that. Granted, not coconuts and bananas because of your climate, but the point is, on a caloric basis, you are an export-oriented agricultural country, arguably more so than the United States. We can consume more stuff because we're, 6 times your population. Wait a minute, 40, no, 8 times your population. So there's this reality that it's globalization and trade and growing global economics that really afforded us this last 25 years of expansion of agricultural income and valuation of assets.
and I'll ask you this, that de-globalization conversation, I don't, to me, that's pretty mainstream. You kind of see it on the horizon. You see it with what's happening with tariffs. Are people awake to the fact that we're really deglobalizing? And I think that's, I'll say a few things and then you can run with it. But deglobalization, Trump and his tariffs, protectionism, this is all one and the same conversation, right? Are people ready for this?
If they're in my audience, they've been hearing about it for the last 6 months. I started kind of pointing out, with or without Donald J. Trump, there was already um, a growing push among an electorate for protectionist policy. You can go to Europe, and I've been unpopular, I'm sure, with some of my European followers when I said, Europe, you've been pretty protectionist for at least 3 decades. Huge tariffs on cars that come from North America. We didn't do that to them. We don't charge. We are now. We're going to. But if you want to sell a Mercedes in the United States, granted, there's some Mercedes that are made here, but there's also a bunch that come from Germany, whatever. They've been protectionists on their main manufacturing. They've been protectionists on energy until then they got over a barrel and realized, oh, wait, now we're dependent on Russia for energy. That's not good because we're kind of at war with them because we're back in Ukraine. So now they're going to start buying American energy, we think. They've been protectionists as all get out on agriculture. Remember, in France, all you got to do, about every other week, the French farmers drive their tractors around the Eiffel Tower and are bitching about something. They're in perpetual protest over there to protect their native industry of agriculture. We haven't really been that way. Obviously, we said China out there west of where you are, lentils and edible beans. A lot of plant protein isn't consumed in Winnipeg; it's consumed in New Delhi. So India, with what 1 or 2 thirds of the country's allegedly vegetarian, it's been great for your western provinces that can a perfect climate for growing plant protein products. That's happened, and it's been good for agriculture in Canada and the United States because we're very export-driven ag economies. But you could say that this protectionism and nationalism are kind of the same thing. It gets a bad rap in the popular media. They'll say things like these nationalists, or worse yet, white nationalists, as though there's some meeting where we all go to and decide that we're the second coming of the KKK. What really it is fear. And what I'm talking about is if you're 75 years old and you got money in the bank, Are you really going to be that crazy about it and put it out there and risk it all? Or are you going to be more conservative? What if you're a nation that's the equivalent of that 75-year-old and you say, we've got a steel industry, we've got a car industry, we've got a nice ag industry. We're a threat. We are threatened, I should say, from other countries that could take this away from us. Let's just get a little more closed off. Let's have some border protection. Let's just isolate ourselves a little bit. It's a natural phenomenon, frankly, once you get to where you are economically doing well, to be a bit more protectionist. So look at Europe. They feel like they've been overrun by their leaders bringing in residents from third world countries. That's we got a problem. The European Union is a little bit too globalist and is cramming environmental policy down their throats. And then there's this threat of whether it's a developing China or a warring Russia right to their east, or an aggressive United States, or even worse yet, a Canada that decides they're going to play hardball. That breeds this protectionism or isolationism, and it's been brewing. And I'm not in any way getting political here about this. Donald Trump didn't start this. You could see, if you are a thinking and observing person, you could see these things happening already before the orange guy ever took the office.
Yeah, and I don't think well, I shouldn't speak for anybody, but I don't think a lot of people do, because you hear the mainstream, right? And then that's the hidden.
Well, obviously,
current.
a quick place to use an illustration. I just spoke to the egg farmers of Ontario. They've been protecting Canadian egg producers since the mid 1960s. The dairy industry, the poultry, and the egg industry in Canada are examples. And I'm not judging. In fact, supply management makes a lot of sense for the producers. And then the argument, of course, is it props up farm profits. It's good for small town, good for rural Canada. And I say there's two other problems, though. The consumer's paying a heavier price, in which they sell it on and say, yes, they are, but in the United States, you're paying it around the back door with subsidies to farmers because the eggs aren't profitable, and we bail out dairy farms, whatever. So that's true. There's the other big problem with that, Tracy. The supply management, which as an economist, I generally oppose, but I understand why it exists for all the reasons we said. Thriving rural neighborhoods, keeping farmers in business, fixing the supply so there's not going to be huge supply shocks and shortages and bare shelves, all that kind of stuff. It creates an asset that is completely imaginary. Quota is not an asset. It is, but it's not a real asset.
Damian, I'm handing you the can opener for you to just open every can of worms, okay? I love it.
Well, no, on that front, I think it's really important.
Please do. Yes.
Okay. Here's your asset classes.
Yeah.
Cash, and that could be cash in a jar buried in your yard, or it could be under your mattress, or it could be in a bank savings account. Cash. Stocks, ownership of a company. Bonds, secured debt. Real estate. Commodities, and that could be everything from corn to gold. I said real estate, right? You could say collectibles. You could even say a barn full of 57 Chevys, or art, if it has value. And you could even say Bitcoin, which allegedly is an asset, or maybe it's a currency. I'm still not sure. Quota is not in any of those categories, and yet it gets lended against. And you can say, no, these Farm Credit of Canada doesn't loan against quota. I'm like, well, that chicken farm over there has $5 million of quota, and there's only $1 million worth of assets. So you tell me what the loan is against, if there's a loan. So it distorts economics. But again, I have actually predicted, and I got a standing applause there at the Egg Farmers Ontario, is supply management going to come to American agriculture? And we could see if this is a big downturn. 2024 was the first year down after record 21, 22, and 23. Let's say this extends, and you can say trade does it, just like you can say the grain embargo created the 80s. And I said that was only one element of it, of spatting with China. But then there's the interest rate pressure. Interest rates aren't 18%, but they're more than double what they were just 4 years ago. There was 3% money on the street just 3-4 years ago, and you're talking 6.5 to 8 money right now. So on a comparative basis, again, you can say it's not 18. Well, it didn't go from 3 to 18 back then. It went from 7 or 8 to 18. You could say it still is about 2.5 times of what the prevailing interest rate was. We're 2.5 times what the prevailing interest rate was just 4 years ago. So there's a comparison to be made there. I just can continue on about this. I feel bad because I'm giving you such long answers, but you know how you said you like the way my brain is oftentimes running, and oftentimes I point out things and think differently than a lot of mainstream agricultural people do.
Well, it's important too, because I don't think fairy tales and warm and fuzzy puppy and rainbow stories really help us if we as a younger generation haven't seen that. Should we not do a service to the younger farmers and say, wait a minute, we have a lot of comparisons. Like you said, we hope it's not going to get that bad. We have a lot of comparisons, but I also think there's even bigger things at play. So, young farmer, like, whoa, right? Like, hold on, like, don't go all in. And then all of a sudden it does. I won't go on, but I think these conversations are important, the most important.
Yeah. And the thing is, like I said, it's one thing to say the 70-year-olds that got told, feed the world, fence row to fence row. There's going to be more food has to be produced between now and 2050 and all that, those slogans. Feed the Nine. That was one of the agricultural companies, an animal pharmaceutical company 10 or 15 years ago when things were really good, like 2005 till 2013 was obviously just, oh, man, great time to be an ag. Feed the Nine. In the next 10 years, we're going to get to 9 billion people. Oh. It's not happening. And that was their big thing. So what the great part is, if you are, say, 35 to 40-year-old, like it spurred me to kind of talk about this. To your point, you saw my video walking in the desert thinking about this. And it was in no way condescending or talking down to people that are that age. But then you'd say, okay, well, what's the answer? Well, first off, realizing the issue is the first step, right? And I'm not, realizing that demand is not going to increase exponentially, probably ever again, and certainly not forever because of the population, the demographics, the realities. I hear ag people saying, well, just open up new markets. Okay, that's clever. There's some basis in truth for that. But here's the thing. We are in, even after this nationalism and countries trying to shut down some borders and trade disputes, we're still in a pretty globalized economy. If you have money and are hungry in the world right now, you can get fed. Meaning, the idea of opening up new markets, Tracy, we love to say that. I'm sure the Canadian Beef Association says this, and the National, Soybean Association. It's fine, wonderful. But at some point, you got to realize nobody is going unserved. There's not some country of 100 million people sitting there with cash in their hand saying, damn, if somebody would just come along and open up our market and sell us their stuff. And that is a very counter to what we think. We keep going to these meetings, we're going to open up new markets. I'm like, well, they're eating now. Someone is feeding them, So if there's opening up that market, that means Australia is not selling them wheat now; they're getting Canadian wheat. Or if you're opening up that market, it means that Cambodia was getting their soybeans from Brazil, and now we're going to take that share from them. How did you do that? Did you do that because you sold it cheaper? The reality is, in a global market right now, if you have money and a hunger, someone is satisfying you, and that's a very difficult thing for a lot of folks to get their hands around because we just assume, oh, there's probably 1 billion people with a fat checkbook and they just don't have any food. We just got to go and sell them stuff. It's not reality.
That is uniquely said. Yep. Very uniquely said. That's good. Okay. So we could go more into tariffs and China. Here's a few things, Damian. You can take it where you want because I know we could talk for hours. Tariffs and China. Is this the new normal? And then the one thing I want to ask about is the Maha and then Robert Kennedy Jr. Are we going organic? Kind of, what do you think farmers need to be thinking about this year, 5 years? What should be on our mind?
You should have saved some of these topics knowing that I get going about stuff, and we can do another episode in a couple of months. On the China thing, is it the new normal? I just believe that there's a strong conviction in my mind that we will have trade spats for indefinitely because of the reasons already mentioned. Protection of, this has been going on for steel for a long time. A lot of people don't think about that, but let's just compare corn or wheat or any other product that we make in agriculture to steel. Japan was dropping when Japan became the economic powerhouse that it did, and that happened 70s and 80s. Okay. There was a prediction back then, again, giving some historical perspective. Japan was going to supplant the United States as the globe's #1 economy. That was common thinking. In fact, you could pick up any paper back then, and it was all about Japan, Japan, Japan. Going back again, 40 plus years ago. All the electronics were made in Japan. They were only about 130 million people in Japan. They had this raging economy, pictures of Tokyo. Oh my God. Japanese people would fly to Hawaii just to play golf. I mean, this was absolutely was the thing. And then what happened? Aging and declining population, and then global competition. Somebody else could make VCRs. Okay, if you're 35, Google VCR. Some other country somewhere would have folks that could work more cheaply, and the high tech stopped being as high tech. I can go on and on. These things are reality. So then steel. Japan was dumping their steel because they wanted to keep this thriving Nippon Steel, and these other companies could make steel. And so it became protecting steel. Right now, there's South Korean steel, there's Chinese steel, there's Brazilian steel, obviously American steel, and that's one that usually gets protected. Like, why? I don't know. They must have a hell of a lobby, but globally, we try to protect steel. For some reason, countries do that. When it's everything, Tracy, making steel is not hard. I'm not being mean to the companies that do so. Just like making wheat is no longer the challenge that it would have been 100 plus years ago. We figured out how to keep the locusts from eating all of our crops. We have figured out how to grow crops even with a lesser amount of precipitation. We're damn good at it. We're good at making hula hoops, and so much so that we had to put the hula hoop factories in China so that we could have somebody working for cheap to make them. Sneakers. You know, is it hard to make sneakers anymore? No, that's why they're made in Vietnam, where they can pay somebody $1.80 an hour instead of $18 an hour you'd pay in Canada. So what's the answer? If everything is easily made and you don't want to give up, what you've got, the answer is clamoring for protection. Hey, protect me. Hey, government, keep the. We want our Nikes. We want them to be made over there in Cambodia. But by God, we also want to make sure that we can still go out here and grow our lentils or produce our milk.
Okay, we'll talk again because we could do hours and hours on end, but I'm going to really put you on the spot unless you want to touch on anything else in there.
I want to come back after let's let the Robert F. Kennedy thing play out for another month or two, and we can go into the Maha, because I do see that as something that's a separate topic on the political front. On the political front and the trade front, I think that we should stay on that because that ties right into ag economy. And what we're doing, it looks like here in the United States, is already ramping up. There's going to be payments from USDA. Our Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, was on a barnstorming tour around Iowa a week or so ago, and at every stop she pledged that this administration is not going to leave farmers behind, and this trade war is going to cost you, but we'll make up for it. It's all bunk, because the commodity prices today are better than they were in October before there was an election or a trade spat. So they're girding up to give money to American farmers, claiming it's because of a trade spat. Hell, the commodity prices are better now than they were before the election, before there was a trade spat. I think they just want to give money to farmers. I don't know what that means for Canada, because every Canadian I ever work with says, yeah, well, we don't get the kind of support that they do down south of the border from policy. And obviously subsidies are just another form of protectionism, Tracy. It's we're going to prop up this industry. You're making more soybeans than the globe even demands. So we'll pay you to do so. It's protectionism.
Interesting. Okay, we'll have a continuation of this, but I want to put you on the spot on one question. I'm curious how you'd answer this. So I do believe you have children, but if not, we're making up a fake child for you. They're about 28 years old and they want to farm. Let's say they're farming already. And they're nice, but they were at a point where they're like, yes, we're starting to feel good. We want to expand. What would you be telling your dear son or daughter right now? That's really putting you on the spot.
We do have 2 labs. Yeah. So if I had a 28-year-old daughter or son working in production agriculture, I would give him this advice, and as unpopular as it may be. We
Mhm.
want to expand. I say, okay, I'm going to loan you $1 million. How are you going to expand? And then they're going to tell me, well, I'm going to go and buy some more farm ground or put that down on a bigger piece of equipment, whatever. Typical farmer answers. And then I'd say, okay, how about option B? Well, what's option B? I'm going to give you this $1 million. I'm going to give you 5 different places where you could diversify and secure a better return than you can in production agriculture. How do you mean? You could buy 3 convenience stores. You could use that million and split it $33,000 each way and buy a convenience store. Your cash flow is going to be better. Your fluctuation is going to be far less. You're not going to have big ups and big downs. Yeah, there's going to be some months you sell more gas or more Coca-Cola than others. What about storage units? What about a apartment building? And you're saying, Damon, that's not farming. I said, no, but where I believe the future is going, the successful agricultural entrepreneur is going to indeed have to be entrepreneurial. And that means diversification. Diversification used to mean, Tracy, you had a chicken barn and you milked cows. And if you're really lucky, your wife was a teacher, and that way you got insurance. So that was the old school. Diversification in the future. And I guess I would just keep going back to the money. I just said, you want to expand? Good. You want to grow your business? Yeah. I'm going to buy more farm ground because what farmers love to do, grow more soybeans, right?
Oh,
Look at the margins. I'm going to I'm going to give you $1 million. Now let's talk about how to get a return on that $1 million. Everything that I named has a better return, arguably with less, with it's all work. So it's not like saying less work. I'd say with less, shall we say, potential for high ups and high downs.
right.
I would say go ahead and be a farmer, but look to diversify as part of your expansion, just versus the usual of more acres, more pens, more cows, more chickens.
I love that. What a great answer. I'm glad I asked that question. Thanks, Damian. So, any parting words, and then tell our audience how they can connect with you if they want to find your content.
You can find me at DamianMason.com. If you're watching this, you can see my name. It's right here on the backdrop behind me, Damian, Damian Mason, like a bricklayer, DamianMason.com. You can find me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. And I'm on YouTube. I'm trying to build that. I do produce the Business of Agriculture show. I also do work with Extreme Ag. That's production agriculture guys. I host their Cutting the Curve podcast. We have a new show called The Granary, which we shoot here at my on-farm tavern, my old granary building that I converted into a saloon. And it's real farmers talking about real issues from personal to professional. Um, Parting, I want this thing to work out. I want the USMCA revamped. We do have a trade deficit, meaning we about $65 billion of we buy more of Canada than Canada buys from us. And it's about more than double that with Mexico. Now, that makes sense because the United States is obviously about 25% of the global economy, roughly 11 times the size of Canada's economy, and maybe about the same with Mexico. And I'm not in any way pulling some jingoistic talk here. I'm just saying what the three countries can do together without an ocean between us, with a generally unmilitarized border for our entire histories, with the exception of when the United States was, taking stuff from Mexico 200 years ago. There's so much strength. There's 340 million people in the United States. There's about 40 in your country and about 130 south of the border. So if you take Canada and Mexico, add them together, they're about half the U.S. population. But obviously, about 1/6 of the economy on a comparative basis to the United States. But what can be done together when you talk about the economic advantage? We have water. Many places do not. So talk about productive capacity for ag or manufacturing. We have obviously more affordable labor south of the border. We have generally little trade restrictions. We don't get hung over the barrel of supply chain waiting on stuff to come from countries that we are at war with or in conflict with. US and China more in conflict than China and Canada, but that's not necessarily, again, because of Trump. We've kind of been there for a while because of the theft of intellectual property and the fact that China wants to take over the United States spot militarily and economically. So I think the trading bloc that could be Mexico's got an ascending economy, has become the United States' #1 ag customer, tied basically with Canada. supplanting China, which has now moved to our 3 customer and dropping like a rock because they have economic problems and because they obviously have ill will toward the West. This thing has to happen. I don't like headlines like I'm reading right here, Tracy, in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. It says Canada picks leader to fight Trump. And this is not allegedly an anti-United States. This is a Wall Street Journal, for crying out loud. I don't like the headline, and I don't know that I like the sentiment, and I don't know that it's good for anybody picking a leader to fight Trump, whether that's even true as to why that happened. There's so much opportunity given the size of Canada's economy, on a per capita basis, et cetera, and the rich amount of resources. So I really want this to work out. And I think everybody in business and in agriculture probably does. It'd be good for everybody. So I'm hopeful that happens. And obviously I don't, nobody's called me in to negotiate the trade deal yet, but it needs to happen.
Just make sure, you have your ringer on, Damian. They should be calling soon. I like that.
And by the way, there's obviously there's going to be some sides that aren't happy. That's the thing, is that there's in any arrangement, that's the old thing about when you come to an agreement, you don't get everything you want typically, and I don't know what that entails exactly, but there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, I think, in the 3 countries having a free trading zone or something of that sort.
I like it. Very uncertain times right now, and I think for the next little while, right? We have some work to do.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that, again, I'm not completely certain that it's completely politically caused. I think some of these fractures and fissures were maybe brewing for the last little while.
We just reached the perfect storm.
Yeah. So
Damian,
anyway.
I love this conversation. I love that you are sharing these alternative ways to look at things that I think are super important for people to have on their mind, right? So Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. Next time we'll do this in person sometime and drink some Molson's, because that's always something we should do.
I love it. You guys in the audience, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, like it, share it, get it out there so other farmers can hear what Damian has to say. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.